Information Technology Leaders is sponsored by the Microsoft Corporation. This week on Information Technology Leaders, Jon Crossley, Vice President for Cap Gemini Ernst Young. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest refers to himself as a late bloomer. When he graduated from what we know as high school in England, he had no idea what he wanted to do. But after selling fruits and vegetables where this introvert found himself yelling, "2 melons for a pound," he knew he had to try a different route. College furthered his interest in computing, and he ended up following the professional path through several companies up the ranks of consulting. With a combination of technical expertise, strategic vision, and gentle but extremely effective management skills, he is now a vice president for Cap Gemini Ernst Young. Please welcome Jon Crossley. So tell us about where you grew up.
I grew up in a town called Farnham in England, which I always describe to people as if you take a line between London and Southampton, it's exactly about halfway down.
That's random. And what was that like?
It's a great town to grow up in. It's some of the origins of the town from the 9th century. Some of the buildings in the town are still 16th century little houses.
Really?
So the benefits of living in the country and still close to London.
You had described yourself as a late bloomer. Can you talk about what you meant by that, and also in conjunction with the British school system at the time?
Yeah, so the British school system's much like you go through secondary school up until about the age of 15, and then you transfer to what we call sixth form college for generally 2 years. Sixth form college approximates to high school in the US. And therefore you do the O-level exams, which are typically called the ordinary level exams at the secondary school, and then you do advanced level exams at the sixth form college, and that's usually the precursor to going on to university, college, and so forth. So.
And you had said that a car accident set back your plans, but you ended up describing that as a good thing.
It turned out to be a good thing because I had gone through my 2 years of sixth form college. I quite honestly was at a certain age where I was maturing, and I was really not focusing on studies and so forth. And as it came up towards my final exams at A-levels, I actually was involved in a very bad car accident, which took me out for about 6 weeks from college. And when I came back to do the exams, I didn't do so well. And I probably wouldn't have done that well anyway, quite frankly, because I was still maturing. But what it did was it put an extra year into my education, and it was a year that I needed to mature.
In what way?
Well, I just wasn't focused on studying. I wasn't focused on what I wanted to do, and I wasn't working hard at college, quite honestly. And so that third year that I came back, different motivation really knuckled down, and it was a big, big difference.
Yeah. You didn't initially plan to attain higher education. What was your first job out of school?
My first job out of school, I did this part-time greengrocer job that I did from probably when I was 14, 15 years old. And I worked for a family that were in the local town. And they were a family originally out of London, quite a rough crowd, but a good kind of educational, hard-working labor type job. Then when I left the sixth form college, then I went and tried to find my first career, and I went as a surveyor for a painting contracting company.
And what does that person do?
Well, that person goes around and measures the painting works. And the only thing I would say about that job is, after 2 years, if you think anything's more boring than watching paint dry, trying to measure it's even worse.
How did you first become interested in computers?
During the time I was working for the painting contracting company, I'd sort of got an interest into home computers. During the sixth form college, I'd had my initial exposure to computers, very, very primitive type mainframe type computers where we had access to service, but very, very limited. But when the home computers came along, it began to really accelerate the fact that you could sit down and do it. So I found myself at home trying to program these home computers. That was more interesting to me than going out. So developed an interest around that.
So you finally did decide to go to university. How did you select which university you attended?
I really didn't spend too much time picking the university. I got to a certain point where I knew the painting, being a surveyor wasn't what I wanted to do. I'd sort of left that job, gone back into being a greengrocer almost full time. Standing in the wind and the rain in the markets in the middle of winter didn't seem to me like a good career choice. So, I decided that I needed to research and do something different. So there was Farnborough College of Technology was offering a very, very good computer science course. I did a little bit of exploration, but to be honest, it was a bit of a gamble. It was just, I need to do something, go do it, type thing.
What was the job market like when you were graduating? It
was pretty tough. You look back to 1985 and you say, well, technology services and people with those kinds of computing skills were pretty rare. The challenge was that if you had experience, the sky was the limit at the time. But new folks coming out of college, graduating from college, really were finding it difficult to get a job.
So how did you manage your recruiting experience?
I lucked out, and again, this goes back to the total naivety of my career at the time. I was pretty close with some college lecturers. They were using some of the work I was doing as examples for some of their classes, and they made some recommendations to me about companies that I should go look at. And at the time, I hadn't even considered consulting. I mean, in my family, you kind of focused, you went through college, you got a job, you went to work. And so I hadn't really thought about what kind of company I wanted to work for. So they had recommended me to a couple of consulting companies, one insurance company, suggested I go talk to them. I did some interviews, got a job offer, pretty much within a few days of interviewing, and was pretty much set from there.
Do you remember your first project?
Yes. I joined a company called System Designers, which through a couple of acquisitions is now part of EDS, and I was in the military communications group. And so our job was to build some of the communication systems, and so part of what I was doing was the Intel 8085 assembler programming for a very sophisticated military communication system that would actually spit out paper tape at the end of it. So all that computing technology and you get paper tape.
Did anything surprise you about this first professional work experience?
I don't think there were too many surprises. The kind of expectation you have of the kind of projects you're going to do when you go out to work is very different from when you get there. Because I went into a military communications division. They were doing military contracts. A lot of the work that we did was some of the work we did was very exciting, but some of it was very mundane type things. So one of the jobs we had in the first, I think, couple of months that I joined was a tape production. And we literally were making copies of software tapes that had to go out to the Army.
So not very exciting necessarily, but critically important.
Yeah.
You then moved from the military side to the commercial side. Was that more appealing?
Much more appealing. I moved over to the commercial division of that company. They had some very big contracts with Ford Motor Company in the UK and in Europe. And it was much more what I had expected to do from college. And I had always had this kind of career aspiration that said that as a computer science graduate, I would come out, be a programmer, programmer analyst, project manager, and move up that way. And so I got that opportunity to go back there and really just focus on programming for a while, learned a lot about the computers and the technology, very, very, very interesting projects.
Did you like coding?
I enjoyed it. There was a time when I really enjoyed it, and I would tell you after a couple of years, there was a time when it was time to get out of coding.
Why was that?
It just at some point you lose your interest in the technology gain, And I've gone from that. We used to program in this PIC basic type language. I'd learned C, C++, and at a certain point there, when the Visual C++ and those kind of tools came along, I was way past my coding career.
So after 2 years with Systems Designers, you decided to leave. Why?
Bit of a short-sighted career plan. Working very closely with, working on the project that we were doing for Ford, we had expertise that were coming in from a subcontract company, a little company out of London called Decisionware. And, I'd show up every day in the car park in my beat-up old Volkswagen Golf and rusted out. And these guys would pull up from this other company and they'd have these sports cars that were company cars. They were clearly earning a lot more money than I was. And so the temptation was too great. They offered me a job and I took it. So.
You said you convinced yourself that this was a real opportunity. Was it?
It didn't turn out to be. It looked that way at the time. There was the opportunity for some part of company ownership. There was the opportunity for travel. It was a small 15-person company. You had a lot of sort of autonomy to do your own kind of thing. But it wasn't a great career plan. There was nowhere to go.
Did you enjoy the travel, and where did you go?
Yes, I did enjoy the travel, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to do that. I spent about 6 months working in Holland, a little place called Hilversum, south of Amsterdam. Spent some time in Denmark, some time in Belgium. So I got to explore the continent a little bit, and that was really good work experience.
Tell us about the project that brought you to Santa Monica, California.
So I arrived back from probably about a 3-month assignment in Holland, back into London, early January 1988, and went to meet my boss, and she said, "I've got a deal for you." She said, "I have a project that, if you want to go to the United States, I've got a project for you. The bad news is that you need to leave Sunday." This was a Thursday afternoon. "You need to leave Sunday and you'll be gone a couple of months." And I said, young, free, single, why not? So got on a plane with 2 suitcases and came over.
Okay, tell us about that project.
Well, I came over for 2 reasons. One of which was to work with a company in Santa Monica that was building a software system for a precious metals coins company in Santa Monica. The name of that company escapes me. And the second part of me being over here was that the company I worked for in London had what we called a 4th generation language code generator product, and I was sort of the product manager of that at the time. And so part of the plan while I was over here was to get around and see as many companies as possible, demonstrate the product, try to get some interest going in the U.S. And I did a fair amount of that while I was over here. It was a pretty badly conceived business plan because unless you can support a product, it's not really worth trying to market it.
Right.
And
how do introverts do at selling?
Well, in that case, I was demonstrating the product, and in most cases, demonstrating based on a technical base of knowledge that I had. So that wasn't so bad. That worked pretty good. But the bit that really bothered me was having to do the cold calls, call up companies to try to get meetings and come see people.
Not fun.
Not fun.
No.
Not fun. Not for me.
Yeah. So the project that you went down there to do mostly, what was that like?
The project was a disaster. We got there within about 6 weeks of an initial delivery milestone, and essentially the owner of the company had hired a fairly senior manager from one of the software companies to run the project, and the gentleman he'd hired was really a salesman for a hardware company, didn't understand anything about running software projects. So we arrived on site and we're looking for the architecture, we're trying to figure out what it is we're building, to go help him, and it was clear to us that there was a very big disconnect between the person managing the project and the person that had owned the company and sold it. So it was a bit of a mess.
So what are some of the things that you ended up doing to get that project back on track, and where did you learn to do that?
Well, that particular project, I wouldn't say I would take credit for getting that back on track. Part of what I did was I sat down with the owner, explained to him why I thought there was a big gap on that one, and he undertook and put some additional resources on the project. But quite frankly, at that particular point, our effort was disengaged.
What made you decide that it was time to look for another job, and how did you manage that search?
Well, that was a little bit of a personal intervention. I met met the lady that's now my wife, Gretchen, while I was in Santa Monica, in an English pub on St. Patrick's Day. I should probably point out. And so personal intervention, we had spent some time together in the US, and I came back to the UK. She came and spent some time with me, and then we kind of devised a plan for me to come back over to the US.
Was it obvious that you would come to the US rather than she go to England?
Yeah, Gretchen had a pretty good photography business down in Los Angeles at the time. She was doing fashion photography for some of the magazines down there, so there was no way for her to be mobile with that. She just had clients there that we needed to be near.
So what job did you find next?
I had, as part of demonstrating this 4GL product, I had visited a lot of companies in the Los Angeles area. And so I called up one of the small consulting companies that I visited down in Los Angeles, and arranged to do an interview there from the UK. Came over from the UK for a week, did interviews with a couple of different companies, and the company in Long Beach had offered me a job.
Now, given your prior experience with small companies, why did this sound like a good idea?
At the time, it was really, I didn't know what the job market would be like in the Los Angeles area. And again, it's a little bit of naivety at play. I needed a job. I needed to personally move over, so it was the quickest way to get over here.
Did the fact that the husband and wife that owned this company had just divorced have any impact on the culture of the company?
Well, they divorced at the time I was with the company. So if you ever want to work in a stressful work environment, when a couple, they had got married when I just joined the company, and after about a year and a half, they brought us all into a room one day to announce the fact that they were separating. And then we went through a period of time where the wife would show up one day and we thought she was going to take ownership of the company, and then the next day the husband would show up and it looked like he was going that way. And I guess there was some debate between the lawyers on who was going to run the company. So we were kind of like a rudderless ship for a while there.
Yeah, can't have more fun than that.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and you were also going through some personal changes yourself. So tell us about what was going on in your life at this time.
I moved over in August 1988. Gretchen and I got married in September. We went back to England, got married. And so we were just settling down in Long Beach. Well, you know, if you think of the town I came from as an old rural town in England, out in the countryside, with probably a population of 50,000, and then you move to Los Angeles, where you've got a population of 10 million people, and I don't know how much concrete is there, but a huge amount of concrete that's there. It's a big cultural change. So,
How did you make it comfortable?
I think that there was a lot of it was focusing on work initially. You know, work is pretty much the same, especially if you're in consulting. If you're consulting in London or if you're consulting in the US, it's very much the same kind of work. And so I had a lot of focus on work, and that actually provided a very stable kind of introduction to me. And then, you know, over time we moved from living on the beach in Long Beach, which was, you know, you get the more far out characters on the beach in the Los Angeles area. And so we moved to Pasadena, which was a little bit more stable. And so things began to settle down after about 8 or 9 months.
And then after about a year with Lorien, you were promoted from senior consultant to project manager. What are the skills that you think you demonstrated to make yourself promotion worthy?
Well, one of the things I think I brought from from my experience was I always had a big focus on methods. And, you know, again, go back to the 1980s, we're talking about the late 80s now, but some of the disciplines around project management that we assume people have today just weren't there. Project management was a little bit of trial and error in some ways on many projects in those days. So I had some good experience of putting methods together on projects in the UK. I came over, Lorien was very, very focused on that as a company. That was the one thing as a little company they did well. And so I was able to apply a lot of that and help organize some of the projects. They also put me on to some of the projects they had that were having some challenges, and I was able to help them out on those pieces.
Do you remember a key project?
The one project I always say is a big example, and I think I was actually technically promoted to project manager before this project, but we did a big project for the Los Angeles cellular telephone company. It's now one of the big divisions of AT&T Wireless. And that was a project where the customer service VP at LA Cellular had literally picked us out of the yellow pages, called somebody at Lorien and said, I need a system to help me order and provision cell phone service for our customers more quickly. And the service they had at the time was just faxes in from the various dealers that did the orders. So without thinking, somebody on the end of the phone at Lorien said, yes, we can do that. And we didn't have the skills. We'd never done a project that big, but because the client didn't really understand that, this project got underway. So what was initially sold was a project that I think was about $50,000, if I recommend. It could have been $50,000 or $100,000. And it was being run by another project manager who at some point decided to up and leave the company. And so the project then got handed to me. And so as part of just taking on the project, I started to look for the contracts and what did we have in terms of signed. And I knew we had about 15 people, and I knew they'd been working out there something like 6 to 9 months. And so I quickly discovered that what we had was a signed contract for the original amount, $50,000. We had billed them something like $500,000, and they were beginning to ask questions about it as I began to take the project over, and we didn't have anything to fill in the gap. Right. So I had to do a fair amount of research, backtracking, trying to figure out what were the legitimate changes that we had verbally been asked to do that had not been approved, and then very quickly put some basic project management processes around scope control and management and getting the client to sign off on things in place. And so my introduction to that client, in fact, was LA Cellular got bought by Lynn Broadcasting, that was then bought by McCaw Communications. And so I met the CIO and the CFO of Lynn Broadcasting, and they had just got into the finances of the project. So they were, the first time we met, they were asking some very heated questions about, why did we pay you all this money? Right. And so part of it was going through that whole exercise with them. So.
What were some of the key takeaways for you personally from that project?
Well, a big focus I've had since that project from this day is on contract management, from scope control, from projects. I'm a big stickler for making sure that we have very, very good black and white contracts on what we do with projects, that any of our changes are written, signed and approved. And to this day, whenever we do anything, if we do something verbally with a client, if we don't back it up really, really quickly with a letter of amendment or a change order, you can very quickly run into problems.
Yeah, and then it doesn't happen. And then everybody forgets.
Everybody forgets, exactly. And so to me, there's always that piece you've got to go through with a client where if you've got a change order to sign, you've got to sit down with them and say, you signed this contract for X, we've made these agreed changes, you've got to sign this contract for an additional increment now. And they need to go through that piece, and I find all clients do this, where they accept the fact it's going to cost them, it's going to cost them more money, and there's a bit of a disappointment and an emotional reaction to that. And unless they do that, you don't get that signed. You can't kind of wave them through and gloss over it.
Right. You have to actually
go
through. You have to go through the
They
dip.
have to go through the acceptance, right?
Well, it seemed like things were going fairly well for you at Lorien. You brought in some projects. You kind of solved the LA Cellular project. Why did you decide to leave?
Finally, after so many years of being in the marketplace, I suddenly began to think about my career again. And Lorien was a pretty small company. It was about 25 people. At that particular point, I was pretty much reporting more or less to the owner of the company.
Which was who? At this point?
That was the wife.
The wife?
The wife took over the company. So I was pretty much reporting to the owner of the company. There was really nowhere to go. So, we had hired a really good senior consultant while I was at Lorien, and he had moved to DMR Group, which was a Canadian company that was really establishing itself in LA. And so I decided to he said, you need to come on an interview with this company. They offer careers. You wouldn't believe what can happen. And so I followed that
He said
path.
it's sane, if I remember
It's
correctly.
it's a sane company.
It's a sane company.
People are reasonable.
Now, what were they looking for when they hired you on?
They had a very specific outsourcing project with the LA County Transportation Commission. There was a company that was built in the metro in the Los Angeles area. And so they had about 35 people managing the IT group in an outsourced arrangement, and they needed somebody to come in that had good project management experience, set up a project management office, and provide some quality controls and methodology coaching on their projects.
So it sounded like a lot of the things that you knew how to do, they were bringing you in for, yet you had a coach for a while. What were some of the benefits of having a coach, and what did you learn from that person?
Yeah, DMR had a very, very strong methodology. To this day, I think they still do. It's called P+, and it's probably one of the best systems of development methodologies on the market. The foundation of that methodology is a set of really strong fundamentals. And those fundamentals are almost like a religion to the people that use the methodology. And so the big benefit to me of having the coach was really getting those fundamentals straight, really making it so that I could understand the religion and impart it to people.
And so it didn't do a lot of management coaching, it was more around the methodology.
It was more around the project management methodology, yeah.
Why did you become so interested in getting a project at Boeing?
Well, we were living in the Los Angeles area. We had a change in our personal situation. My wife was pregnant with twins. Well, actually, we had twins. Well, we lived in Pasadena. And as we looked at where do we want to raise our family, the Los Angeles area just didn't seem to be the right place. And so we had developed an interest in the Pacific Northwest. DMR had a fairly extensive project with Boeing. And so it was easy for me to get temporary assignment to that project for a period of 6 months. My goal at the time was very obvious, because as soon as we moved up here on the temporary housing, we sold our townhouse down in Pasadena, and I worked to try and make myself indispensable to Boeing.
And how did you do that?
It was really, part of it is just getting into understanding the Boeing culture and being able to work with the Boeing engineering mentality. Also bringing some new thinking to the methodology that they were using. The P+ methodology that DMR had is very much a waterfall methodology, at least in its original incarnation. And so Boeing had a strong interest in areas like object-oriented methods and approaches. And so what I was able to do was help work with them to adjust the methodology so that they could do object-oriented development projects.
Now, you were promoted from senior consultant to principal consultant,
Right.
Yet you were a senior consultant at some point earlier in your career. How important are titles, and how much do they reflect level of responsibility?
To me, the titles, the senior consultant, the different levels, they weren't really that important. I mean, being a senior consultant in a small company like Lorien really is very, very different from being a senior consultant in a DMR group or a Cap Gemini Ernst Young. At that point, it's really what does the future offer you that's important, not necessarily the level. So.
And how did your job differ after that promotion?
Well, I'd gotten involved in some more technical aspects of extending the methodology. Had some more important roles on some Boeing projects that we were doing for the 777 program.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, the job didn't change fundamentally. You know.
So once again, you're in a situation that's not bad. I mean, nobody's beating you. You're kind of doing well, yet you decided it was time to change jobs again. What happened?
I've been coaching the methodology for 2 years with Boeing and with the project down in Los Angeles. I know I needed to change from doing that. I wanted to get back to doing real project work, managing real projects. I had a couple of former DMR alumni that had gone to Ernst Young, and they gave me some strong recommendations, including the gentleman that did the first move.
Oh, really?
So they again gave me some strong recommendations into Ernst Young, and Ernst Young happened to have an interview day coming up at the right kind of time when I was available. So I thought, well, I need to go and take a look at this, and obviously by this time I was well aware of what the Big Five could do in the U.S. and the size of projects that they would take on. So.
Yeah, it seems that you've already started to also recognize some of the powers of networking. I mean, it had been a long time since you'd actually had to kind of formally apply for a job without having somebody on the inside.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. And in fact, I wonder if any of the jobs I've really had, have been done without some personal relationship. It certainly makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it really does. You said that when you started at Ernst Young, you found it a little intimidating. Why was that? Well,
you got to bear in mind there's this kind of guy that used to be a greengrocer from England that walks into the offices of Ernst Young in Seattle. They have the mahogany walls, the very posh carpeting, and it's very, very quiet and hush-hush. And so it's a little bit intimidating, And it's kind of funny to look back because most of the people in that office I know very, very well.
Wow.
And, perspective change over time.
How did you initially get over the jitters?
The key part of it was just finding a success and getting onto a project and making it successful. And I had a really good opportunity. We were working out at AT&T Wireless here locally. We had some opportunities with the Northeast, with the New York office of AT&T Wireless. It's actually based in New Jersey. Those were people that I had met at Lorien when we were doing the cellular systems. So I had some established relationships there. I was able to aid in some big sales that we did. And then, obviously then delivered on that with some projects. And so, building a bit of a reputation or having a first success was very, very important.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I found is I tend to be best when I start a job where I know that I can easily get that first project win.
Yeah.
Because then you start to prove yourself while you're learning the company, and you can go in there and add value right away, and it's quite comforting.
Yeah, exactly. The other side of it with Ernst Young was, quite honestly, DMR had this very big focus on methodology. Ernst Young's very much a business-focused company, very much focused on the business process at that particular time. And so somebody that was coming in with a technology methodology was actually able to help us sort of extend our projects a lot. Where we previously were always seen to be strong on the business process side. I was able to come into some of the projects we had with the client and bring that IT kind of delivery background.
So you were able to come in and add that kind of value pretty quickly and probably pretty easily because it was in your comfort zone. What were some of the things that weren't in your comfort zone that you wished you'd had in terms of skills coming into that environment?
Yeah, the one thing I ran into with Ernst Young was we had some really, really good strategic thinkers. And if there was one thing I wasn't up until that point was a strategic thinker. And so it was very impressive to come in. Some of the senior managers would understand the client's business strategy better than the client would. And that was a new area for me. And in fact, I spent a year at Ernst Young really focusing on moving myself from just thinking about the tactical, I'm going to deliver this IT project, to really being able to better understand the client's business strategies.
Did that just happen because you decided it was important it happened, or did you sort of do something beyond just kind of keeping your eyes open and thinking about it?
Actually, I actually embarked on a course of study. I bought a number of Mintzberg books and spent a lot of time kind of reading some of the elements of strategy and some of the strategic competitive advantage areas and stuff like that. So that kind of just helped me understand what a business strategy was, how it was put together. Gave me a sort of framework to think about it.
Did you ever think about getting an MBA?
I had given it some thought. It's just never been the time. The challenge of being in consulting is you're never in one place at the same time. So logistically, it always just seemed to be a challenge.
So you would have had to leave to do it. To do it part-time would never have worked.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So after 4 years in a place that you really started liking it and sounded like you did some good growth, you started asking yourself, what else can I do? Why was the partnership track not appealing, and what did you decide to do from there?
Well, there were a couple of things that were going on. One of which was, it was very hard initially for me to see myself be partner. I came into Ernst Young as a manager. I was lucky to get promoted to senior manager. I couldn't see that path to partner.
Why did you say you were lucky to get promoted as opposed to?
Well, I mean, I had done some hard work on some projects, but when I came in as a manager, my thinking, the level of my thinking was, if I ever make senior manager around here, that will just be it. And then suddenly you get promoted to senior manager about a year and a half later, and it's like, oh, now the next thing as a partner, I'll never get there, type thing. So part of it was I was traveling a lot. Consulting does require a lot of travel. I was going out to Chicago pretty consistently for about a year there. And, with the family, it was hard to keep the life balance going. So part of that was driving me to a change.
Yeah. Well, you then joined VoiceStream, VoiceStream Wireless, which is now T-Mobile.
Yeah.
You were a director. What was the initial area of focus for you?
I came in as what they called the director of system planning. And I literally had a number of little departments under that group. One was the business continuity, dealt with all the disaster recovery and those kind of plans. Another group was the sort of environment management, actually setting up all the new hardware that would come in from HP or Sun and putting it into production or putting it into test platforms and stuff. The third area was managing security, putting into place some security procedures. And then the other group was some vendor management, really managing our contracts with our vendors at the time.
What were some of the biggest challenges you were facing?
Well, one of the big difficulties is you go from this consulting environment where you're advising people on what they should do, suddenly to be in charge of getting it done. And there's a big difference between a consulting environment and a business operations environment. So that was challenging. The second part of it is that, and it's just a lesson learned for me, is that when you come into a company to set up an organization, at the time, this is 1999, the job market was very tight. Companies were having trouble getting employees. And so where I expected to arrive with a team of about 15 people, I arrived and there were only 2 people.
That's a difference.
So that was hard.
Yeah.
Just getting some traction in the organization was tough because of that.
You said that you set up a culture within a culture. What did you do and why was that necessary?
There's a big difference between consulting companies, particularly the big 5, and business operations. Consulting companies very much focus on the careers, mentoring, counseling individuals, really trying to help them grow. And by doing that, they're able to be better consultants to our clients, right? Business operations is about, we've got something to get done, we've got a date to get it done, we've got to go do it, right? And so it's in some ways a tougher environment to operate in, and that was a challenge. I was coming in as a consultant. I began to set up an organization where, very much in the mold of consulting, I was giving more counseling and advice, a lot of respect to the people that worked in my team. And I found that there was a bit of a different culture forming between my group and the other teams that we worked with. And so as those teams came together, we'd find there was quite often friction, and I'd find I was doing a little bit of damage control because, one of my people had been to a meeting with somebody else from another department and got beaten up. Didn't like that because they liked the respect factor. Well,
you said that you normally give jobs about 2 years before you kind of go through an internal checkpoint. Yet you decided to do one early here, and you went about 6 months. Did it feel like the right move to get out of there, or did you have a lot of mental deliberation?
There was a fair amount of mental deliberation. I was really only there, like you said, 6 months, and about a month or so before I left, I began to think about going back to consulting. And when I sat down and thought about it, it was interesting enough. All of the baggage of travel and things like that had bothered me in consulting. Suddenly didn't seem to be as much as a problem. I really missed the environment of consulting where there was a tremendous amount of sort of respect amongst the peers and the team, and that was the big enticement to go back. But there was a lot of deliberation to do that.
Yeah. So you found your home back home.
Exactly.
And you were lucky to do that.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was kind of interesting in that, I worked for a partner, Julia Anderson at the time, when I'd left the company, and when I decided to go back, I just put out a email to her and said, "This is what I'm thinking of doing. Might be interesting for us to talk." And I wasn't quite sure if she was going to come back and say, "Good luck,"
right?
But she said, "Let's meet and let's talk," and we had a couple of meetings, and she sent me a letter of offer to rejoin.
Was it hard or easy coming back?
Easy. I mean, it was very much falling into, it's almost like you've got none of the baggage of any of the decisions or anything that you've made before you. You're starting afresh. Everybody welcomes you back. Everybody wants you to come and work on their project. So it was really good.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate. I got on a fairly small project, which was more like an assessment phase.
Which project was that?
This is a company called uwvideo that was actually a joint venture between E-Trade and Ernst Young. And it was to set up a financial planning website. And it was built on Microsoft technologies. So the Ernst Young had spent a couple of years trying to get this product together, was really having trouble getting it into production, had formed this relationship was beginning to form this relationship with E-Trade, I should say. And they were doing this with their own organization. So it's like a subdivision, separate business division of Ernst Young. They asked us to come in and take a look at it to help them figure out why they couldn't get the product delivered. And we ended up coming in and taking it over. And so it went from overnight being like a 2 or 3 person project doing an assessment to suddenly, our Advanced Development Center in Bellevue is full of people now programming this project.
Well, that must have felt good, again, under the theory of an early win.
Oh yeah, it was an early win, it was a big win, and it was a great project.
So you rejoined the company in February of 2000, and then I believe was it May of 2000, Cap Gemini and the consulting arm of Ernst Young decided to merge. How has the company changed?
Big difference between a partnership structure of Ernst Young, Big 5 company, and a publicly traded company like Cap Gemini. And as much as I think Ernst Young would like to think it was a well-run consulting company, there's a lot of things you don't have to do if you're not a public company. And so there was
Like what?
There's a lot of transparency required of a public company that's not required of a partnership. So suddenly, we had a big focus on being able to really project our sales bookings across our groups accurately, being able to project how much revenue we were going to bring in, really focusing on our costs. So a big transformation for all of us.
And you were promoted to vice president, which is pretty much the same as partner. Now, given that you never thought you would make partner because it looked so far away, how did it feel now? Did it feel like something you were ready for? Did it feel like something that you were happy about?
Yeah, it was actually a very pleasant surprise because I rejoined in February 2000. I had thought that if I had ever had the opportunity to get promoted, it was probably going to be a couple of years out. I think fortunately because of the size of the project we were able to do with uwvideo, that kind of helped my case a lot. And so my promotion kind of came up early. I had tremendous support internally from the other VPs, and so the promotion went through pretty quickly.
How did it sort of change your day-to-day life and your responsibilities?
Well, unfortunately for us, the time I got promoted late 2000, as we went into early 2001, was the time when the dot-com bubble burst.
Right.
So my early first 6 months of being a VP was still very much focused on delivery, managing the big project that I had. There was enough revenue there for a VP to manage. But then suddenly everything cut off in one fell swoop. And so suddenly it was like, okay, now I'm a VP and I've got to go find work.
In 2001, you said that you were faced with a kind of competitive situation where you decided to take the high road. What was that about? Okay,
so if you bear in mind 2001, what happened in the consulting industry was that as the stock market came down in value, the capital spending that drives all of our project-based work kind of went away. So overnight, the consulting companies that have big project-based staffs suddenly really just had an excess of staff, right from staff consultants right through to VPs. So when you get too many VPs now looking for what's a smaller pool of work, you get a lot of competition amongst that work. I had sold a project to one of our clients in the Bay Area, a software company, high-tech software company, had a project team that was down there working. Lo and behold, one day another VP shows up on the job. And he said to me, well...
Not from your office.
Not from my office, from the Bay Area. I had been tracking leads at this same company for some 18 months, and therefore I think I ought to be running these projects. So we were set up with a situation where we had 2 VPs for one client, which didn't make sense for us or the client. And it was a case of, well, what do I do with this? Do I, do I battle it out with this VP and we end up with a political battle, or, what should I do? And one day I just decided to sit back and say, it's not really worth going to the political battle on this. So I spoke to our regional area VP at the time, and I said, look, here's the situation. We've got a high-tech company in the Bay Area. We've solved this project. We've got a team down there delivering, but we've got a situation where this other VP and myself now are both engaged with this client. I said, you decide what's the best for the company. I said, I can understand he's in the Bay Area. If it saves on travel expenses, then it makes sense for him to run the project. That's fine. I said, you decide, but I want to put it out there and put it open rather than us having a battle about it.
And what ended up happening?
The regional areas VP was, hey, you solved the deal, you made it happen. I really want you to be engaged. And the client feedback was, where's this other VP coming from? So that situation just kind of played itself out pretty easily. But the bit that I was particularly proud about with that was we didn't end up with myself and the other VP having relationship issues. We worked together afterwards, and he was a very capable guy.
And it ended up being.
Yeah, so it ended up being
okay.
a very,
Tell us about your engagement in Trinidad.
I've had a project down there for the last year or so. Still have people working down there now. We're working with the monopoly telephone company on the island of Trinidad and Tobago, which, just a geography lesson, is just about 7 miles north of Venezuela, a couple of islands. We're actually helping them put in an Oracle CRM system, which, as you can imagine, for a monopoly telephone company that's not used to customer relationships, the idea of a CRM project is a little bit of a revelation to them. So we've been down there working in the environment down there. We have a fair number of TSTT, as Telecom Services Trinidad and Tobago is the company. Fair number of those people working with us have delivered 2 releases of the system. So we now have it up and working in their call centers, in what they call their public offices, which is probably equivalent to what we call a retail store, working now.
Has it been a fun project?
It's been a fun project. It's definitely had its interesting share of cultural challenges, but definitely a fun project.
Well, your office recently received a huge honor where you were named the Microsoft Certified Global Services Partner of the Year. What are some of the things that you did to earn that award, and how does the Microsoft Alliance work for you?
Well, the Microsoft Alliance to Cap Gemini Ernst Young is extremely important. We are, I think, one of the third global player, global partnership player with Microsoft. I think in 2003, for that award specifically, one of the big wins was the UK Inland Revenue Service, which is the tax service for the UK, and that was a major multi-billion-dollar outsourcing deal based around Microsoft technologies. A huge win. And so, aside from everything else we've got going with, I think we've got something like 4,000 consultants that are Microsoft trained worldwide. Something like 15 solutions we've got, but that big win, I think, typifies the success of the relationship. And both sides have a lot invested in it.
How important has the Microsoft Alliance been to your office?
It's been huge to our office. Literally, the office we have in Bellevue Square was originally set up 5 or 6 years ago as one of the first kind of co-development centers between Microsoft and a system integrator. Microsoft began to realize the importance of getting into the business world, which 5 or 6 years ago was still fairly new to them. They were looking for partnerships with system integrators, and I think Ernst Young approached them and said, let's set up this joint venture. Now, they gave it a funky name, Enteron, at the time, which I think is a body part, but I'm not quite sure, which nobody knew. But it gave Ernst Young the opportunity to build a good core set of Microsoft competencies. It's pretty close to Redmond, so we had a very close working relationship with Microsoft. And I think things have just evolved and got better since then.
How do you see consulting changing over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think there are still some big challenges. If you look at what's happened the past couple of years, all of the consulting companies have been challenged because the average hourly rate that we charge, which is really a kind of a measure of what we get in terms of revenue, has just come down like 40%. So you can imagine all of the big consulting companies have been challenged with how do I get our cost base down to be able to make money at these lower revenue rates. So that's definitely had some challenges. And what we've seen in the organization is our sort of pyramid structure, the ratio of staff consultants and senior consultants to managers, senior managers and VPs has increased. So that's allowed us to get our average salaries down and therefore our average costs down. So that's been a big part of what's been going on. Now we've got to a sort of stable place. Business is beginning to pick up a little bit. I think we've got better at delivery. As I look at the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're going to see continual challenges. Now we see a lot of work going offshore. So we're fighting for work, and we, like all of the big five companies, have really set ourselves up with development centers in Mumbai, where more work will be done offshore. So I think there's what's going to happen to the consulting work is a lot of the system integration work will be done with a big, front end part of the projects, the business analysis, the requirements, and maybe the testing and deployment pieces being done in the US. More and more of the core development type work I think we're going to see being done offshore.
Well, if the advantage to the offshore work is a lower cost structure, what are some of the disadvantages or the challenges of doing that?
Well, you've obviously got the communication factor. I mean, with all of if you look at the telecom bust that went on in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of fiber was laid between here and Asia. So there's a lot of good data communications now. So you can have programs working over there pretty simply, but you've still got communication issues. You've still got cultural issues. When you set those projects up, you've got to bring people to the US really to work for a period of time on the projects so they can get up to speed with the client, with the business needs, and then they go back and work in Mumbai with their own teams. And you've still got to make that piece happen.
And you still have to save money at it because you probably didn't factor all of that into the equation initially.
Yeah.
It always ends up seeming to be a surprise when outsourcing happens. You kind of look at the first blush and it looks like you can save a ton of money because the cost structure is so different, but you forget the price of the overhead to make it work.
Right. There's certainly an amount there. It's still very competitive to do it. I mean, most of the projects we are bidding in the US right now are bid with an offshore delivery component.
Really?
We're also bidding projects where we actually bring resources from India to work in the US for short periods of time because we can still bring them over here at a very cost-effective rate.
Right.
So that's going to be a big factor, I think, going forward.
How would you describe your management style?
I like to think of it as very collaborative. I don't see myself as very autonomous with people. I try to get people to share their ideas. I like to work in an environment where people feel that they are respected, that they can do things and make mistakes without being punished for that. So there's a lot of that. I try to make a lot of communication go on.
What are some of the things that you do kind of early on to gain a client's respect?
The success in client relationships and consulting is all about integrity and trust. You can't go into a client and try and talk fast and hope they didn't hear what you said. That was the nasty bit of the equation. Clients really respect you when you sit down and tell them the bad news as well as the good news. So a lot of it with clients is really, I'll quite often go in with salespeople, and salespeople, they sell. That's what they get paid on, right? So they'll be aggressive and talk about the great things this project's going to do for the business. I make it my point to talk to them about expectations. This is what's going to happen as we deploy this. This is going to be the difficult things. Here's what's really, really complex. And they appreciate that side of things. They appreciate just pure honesty.
I think there's something about telling them that side that makes them believe the rest of it. Because if all you tell them is the good stuff, then they keep sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But if you tell them about the trouble spots and where they're going to happen and what you're going to do about it, it kind of adds credibility to the whole message.
I found that the biggest sales that I've made, some of the big consulting sales I've made are sort of the 8 to 10 million type. That's what I consider a big sale. But those sales are made when you can sit down and look at the client in the eye and talk to them about how you're going to deliver that. And they can look at you in the eye and see that you know how to deliver. Right. That's where that comes out. And when you point out the issues to them before they've even thought about them, that's what they appreciate.
Right. That's kind of what they're paying you for.
Exactly.
In a sense. How does a shy introvert become a successful consultant?
Well, there's a side to me that says that shy introverts, when they're in consulting, are always faking. Right. You have to get used to doing the presentations. You have to get used to putting yourself out in front of clients. And so there's a little bit of me that during the day I interact with a lot of people, and it'll be by phone or it'll be in person, where I'm doing facilitated sessions at clients, meetings, whatever. I manage all that in the consulting day, and then I go back and hide in my shell at night.
That's kind of how it works for you.
About a recovery, yeah.
You focus so much on respect and balance, and I imagine you try and create a fairly level working environment. How do you handle stressful situations? What's kind of interesting, Laura, is that a lot of people will talk to me and say, how can you always stay so calm? And I guess that must be just developed over years of dealing with it, because I always say to people, whenever I hear that piece of feedback, I always say, well, you really don't know what's going on inside.
I worry about things, but the benefit of being a VP in a consulting company where you really don't have anybody to go ask for the daily stuff on, how should I do this, or what's the best thing to do there, is it makes you sit back and think about what's the right thing to do, right? And there's always a right thing to do in any difficult situation. So, we'll get situations where we'll have people working on a project for a client, and we have a certain budget to finish the work in, and guess what? The budget's not right? So now you've got a situation where either you're going to eat the difference, or you're going to see whether there was some additional work that we did and go back and talk to the client about that situation. There's always a right thing to do. And if you underestimated a fixed price job and you're still only delivering the same thing, you can't fairly go back and ask for money. But if you estimated it and the clients asked for something else, then you've got a legitimate, honest reason to go back and talk to them about it.
And so that's how you manage it, is just by doing the right thing?
That's right. That's the way I like to think about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no ulcer brewing here from someone who's not showing the stress?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, one of the questions that we generally ask as we do research on a guest is we talk to people, and one of the questions that we'll ask them is, describe the person's office, because that often reflects the personality. One person told us that John's office is a laptop case sitting in an airline seat, and that he's a true consultant. What has been the good, the bad, and the ugly of all that travel?
Well, the good is that obviously from a family perspective, we get to do these vacations on the frequent flyer miles, and I save a bundle on the travel when we do that, right? The bad is, it's those occasions when, my wife will call me and say, oh, Anna's school, we got our parent-teacher meeting and it's scheduled for this Wednesday, and I'll be like, you know what, I'm not going to be there, and that's the tough stuff,
Yeah. Well, your father's advice to you fairly early on was to look for something that was kind of stable. And I'm sure you respected your father enormously, but you clearly didn't follow that advice in terms of career. How do you coach students in terms of when to follow advice and when not to? What do you tell them about that?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is you can't read. You can listen to people that will give you advice. You can take that advice as black and white. Sometimes I think you have to reevaluate it. So a lot of times I've sat down with people in my career and I've been given advice that says, John, this is what you need to go do. Okay. Well, that advice to me, that advice has a shelf life, right? Time moves on. You can listen to that advice, and somebody advised me a long time ago. He said you're not interested in this surveying business for painting and contracting. You need to go do something different. He was absolutely right. I changed my career. I actually went back to be a fruit and vegetable salesman, which probably wasn't what he meant, but I did that for a while. Then I went into the computing career. I start off on a direction, but at some point you have to come back and say, well, now what do I want to do? At a certain point you have to follow your own. You have to follow a little bit of the gut on what you want to do.
What qualities do you think are going to be important for students of IT to be successful, especially early on in their careers?
One of the biggest things that I find people are sort of missing is the communication skills. It's really important. The technologies will change, right? So you can learn the technology, and it's good to have a good foundation of technology. But I will tell you honestly, the technologies that I learned back in the mid-'80s, I can still look at today's web-based client technologies, security technologies, and I can still see the footprints of those technologies from back in the 80s. Technology is going to change. So you need to get a broad base of that and understand it. The really important thing for people going into the marketplace today is communication skills. Being able to work and be a positive force in a company, through communications.
One other question. With all of the outsourcing going on, which areas would you encourage students to go into that you don't think are going to end up offshore?
Well, I think that there's a big gap. Even if you went from college and you went to work in an IT department for a corporation, the bit that's missing today is people that know how to do the IT piece with business management, right? So if I was going to focus on one thing, it would be the business management of IT that becomes important. The technology pieces, well, they may all go offshore. I mean, India spends a huge amount of education, time education. They've got whatever the ratio of engineers, computer science engineers is way, way higher than the US. But the business management, corporations still run from the US. The business management of IT still takes place over here.
We'll be back right after this.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
Hi, you've mentioned earlier about making yourself indispensable to a company, and you also mentioned that you had thought about going back for an MBA, but you'd have to quit. With so many people going back to school lately, do you think it's more beneficial to go ahead and finish your MBA now while we're still in school, or would an undergrad degree followed by some work experience help more?
Well, that's a good question, because you're asking somebody that didn't really plan out his career in a very logical form. The answer is, completing the MBA. If I had the choice, if I had a chance to do it, I would absolutely have done it. It was just the career I've chosen was in so much trouble. I think in some ways it depends on the individual. In my case, for example, I was pretty immature way up until, well, my wife will probably tell you I'm still immature, but I was very immature up until my sort of late 20s. So to me, going out to work would have been the right thing to do. And then coming back later on would have given me a lot more perspective. But I run into a lot of students that just have a tremendous, very academic, very tremendous perspective, still very young, and I think they could go on and complete their MBA, and that would be fine. But honestly, I guess if I had to choose one or the other, I'd go back and say that getting some of that work experience, I think, is beneficial. I think it just adds to your background and what you can bring to the MBA programs.
I'd like to close with a composite quote from several of the people that Jon has worked with. Jon's a truth seeker. He doesn't need to be right. He figures out what's best for the client first and then works on the strategy. He always focuses on principles above personalities. Jon contributes to teams not only by providing executive direction, but also by getting his hands dirty. His insight goes from strategic partnering with a client down to advising on billing details and change requests. Jon contributes to the office through his mentoring and people management, and he contributes to the business as a whole by keeping ahead of the curve through identifying upcoming business needs and retooling and reskilling to keep our company driving the latest solutions. He is a very personable, very authentic, transformational leader.